Now the question is, I think we shake our heads at that, but the real question is, if elders don't take the lead in the implementation of this, how will it ever happen? I think what happens in most systems is that you set the structure up so that it's not really possible for any of this stuff to happen. So I'm gonna try a few things out on you, and I'm just laying this out for your thought. How do you implement what Paul is saying for the health and the safety of the church? If we're talking about caring for the flock, then what Paul says is it begins by elders caring for one another. And if that's true, how do we implement it? Let me give you several things. Is it possible that the elders, on some kind of a regular basis, ought to sit down with one another and they ought to evaluate each other? Is it possible that the elders, for instance, ought to say, and we've done that some, I'm not saying as much as we should in our body, but to say to this elder over here, brother, you are so good at this. I find that really edifying and a blessing. I hope you do more of that. This brother over here, he's got another area of function, and that ought to be done. But one of the things that may also happen in that is to say, you know, brother, over here, we've noticed that you've sort of slacked off in this area or that area. So we think maybe you ought to be thinking about how to deal with that. Isn't that what you do? I think in our church, one of the greatest failures that I participated in was the failure to take an elder who was becoming dominant and shepherd him. And I think we looked the other way when certain things were said, rather than to say, wait a minute, that's not right. It's not right. It came about that we began to be swayed in one direction because just of the forcefulness and obviously the guy had twice as much intellect as I did. And so, you know, it's easy. You kind of say, I'm backing off. I don't want to go there. You got to really watch that. Is there a time when the elders sit down with one another, confess their weaknesses, and expose areas that need attention? Now, I'll raise another issue for you. In our church, the way we deal with elders is an elder is one who is already doing the work. B, he is one who meets the qualifications for an elder. C, he is recognized by the body as functioning in that capacity. Do you know what I'm saying? There are some guys, for instance, in our body who have been elders who retired, and frankly, their level of influence doesn't diminish because they're men whose authority and wisdom are recognized, and rightly so. So anyway, those three factors come into play. If you make the assumption, which I believe is only based on silence, if you make the assumption once an elder, always an elder, sort of like Supreme Court justices, that's really a pretty unhealthy thing. And I don't know where you go in Scripture. I know of churches where elders are senile and nobody does anything about it. Do you think that enhances the status of the whole group? It doesn't. It doesn't. So we need to look at that and say, if those are the three things, or you may have a list of 4 or 5, if these are the things that make a man an elder, is it possible over 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, 1 or 2 or 3 of those elements don't exist anymore? Then why is he still an elder? Why is a person still an elder who doesn't meet the specifications of Scripture for being an elder? And the question then becomes, how do you deal with that? How do you recognize that somebody has actually now come short of those? Unless the individual himself is so wise and so humble that he acknowledges where he is and resigns, basically you have churches with lame duck elders. That really is not a healthy thing. And it seems to me that may fall within the category of what we're talking about. We used to put we have what we call an elder evaluation form. And when we have somebody we're considering as an elder, we have the qualifications that are set out in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. And we ask people questions about that and ask them, what ministry do you see that this person's doing that indicates they're an elder or a deacon, and so on. At the beginning of our time as a church, we added another blank and said this: Is there any existing elder in our body who you think has ceased to function as an elder? You know, I know it would take somebody with nerves of steel. It's one thing if you sign, if you check it. It's another thing if you sign it, and that may be misery. It actually inadvertently got dropped off. But you know what? Isn't there a time at which the church ought to just be saying, who are the people who really function, are qualified, and acknowledged to be leaders? When you have that group of people, then it's not an embarrassment, I don't think, to exalt them as the leaders that God has put forth. Let's see. Oh, another one. Dividing up administrative turf. Now, I don't know how you guys do it in your churches, and I understand that we have, as a church, you have all kinds of areas of responsibility. How we've chosen to do it, and I'm not altogether happy with it, is you say, okay, Elder Brown, he's in charge of the Sunday school. Elder so-and-so, he looks over the benevolence program, and you slice it out. The problem with that is one man now owns a piece of turf. And it seems to me that that's not true plurality. So is there a way in which the elders can actually function corporately and not have people owning things independently and autonomously where it can be a problem? Those are things to think about. But one of them is if you've got guys who have the right spirit, then when it comes to an area, for instance, in an area that I would be responsible for, I would never make a decision of any substance, and I'm talking about dollars or policy or whatever, without at least talking to one or two other elders, perhaps all of them, and saying, guys, here's the issue, here's what I'm thinking about, where do you guys want to go? And that way they still own it. And that to me, I think, is really an important thing. Here's one you probably haven't thought of. If I had a PowerPoint, I'd put a picture up here right now of, actually there were 6 guys and 1 woman sitting at the table. I won't quite tell you how the woman showed up, but it happened. And she's now overseas serving the Lord on the mission field. In all the 35 years that I have preached, we've had what we call the Friday seminar or the Friday forum. The Friday before I preach a message, I sit down with that group of people. Often there will be 1 or 2 or 3 elders present. I sit down and I basically talk through the text and talk about where I'm going to go. It depends on how well or not well the last Sunday went, but also open for discussion is, what about last Sunday? What that does is for one thing, if I'm a little off the mark, as I can easily be, if I'm a little off the mark, if my logic doesn't flow, if my exegesis of the text isn't that good at that point, somebody calls it to my mind. They've saved me from embarrassment. I would far rather be corrected in that group of 6 guys than I would to stand up in front of that crowd and make a fool of myself. It's a powerful thing, but what it says is nobody is autonomous. Everything is done in this plurality of people who are trusted. And the interesting thing that's come out over those 35 years, a number of guys who are excellent preachers have come out of that group, and half of them have not been seminary students. There have been some excellent preachers because they followed the preaching process so long, they're saying to themselves, well, this isn't so hard. And off they go. And they're good. They're really good. So that's something to think about. I'll tell you one story on that, and then I'll get off the hobby horse. A seminary student, got up and he spoke on a particular text, and he did a terrible job. It was just terrible. And one of my preacher friends who was in seminary at the time is blind. He's sitting there at the table with his fingers on his Braille New Testament, Greek New Testament. And he says to this guy, there are 3 parallel participial phrases in the Greek text. How do you understand those? This guy's flopping around like he He didn't know there were 3 parallel participial phrases. He didn't know anything about the text because he had a message that he laid on the text rather than the message coming out of the text. When we got through, the guy said to us, "Isn't there anything good you could say about that message?" One of my fellow elders said to him, "Brother, when you stand behind this pulpit, you speak for God, and you had better not be sloppy when you do." That guy called me back years later, said that was a turning point in my life. I never forgot that rebuke. That's the kind of thing where you got real plurality of function that I think is important.